Welcome to the Kawarthas Small Business Podcast, where we believe the Kawarthas can be the most thriving region in Canada for small business. I'm Brian Rump from Profit Coach.
And I'm Matt Garrity of Managing Digital.
And we are recording today from the Thrive Podcast Studio at the Thrive Co-working Community, 18 Kent Street West in downtown Lindsay. And today, Matt, you are not prepped at all for this topic, but I thought we would talk about some lessons and reflections from the podcast party we had. I know we did a why we were having the podcast party episode. I wasn't planning on having an episode like this, but we had so many really interesting conversations at the event and also some of my own learnings leading up to the event that I thought it would be cool to just have a conversation about some of those, because I think it really opened my eyes up to some different things that I think everyone would like to hear about.
I think it's a joke that I don't prepare for the recording of the podcast, but it's not a joke. And someone on Friday had said to me, like, oh, you didn't prepare, like you don't prepare for the podcast. I'm like, we prepare, actually. We talk a lot about the podcast. And I did write a speech for Friday that I never ended up doing. But I wanted to articulate, I do not prepare for the recording of it.
Yeah.
You and I talk a lot about the podcast. I don't know if we talk about it as much as we maybe used to a year ago, but in general, like, we talk a lot about this podcast. We talk a lot about how to make it better. I think we talk a lot on how to increase its reach and bring more of our friends on, frankly, and give them a platform and give other businesses a platform. And it's not where I intended to start this conversation, but no, I had no idea we were going to talk about this. I thought I was going to suggest to you that we talk about the actual anniversary of the podcast. And then frankly, I can't remember what we talked about on the podcast anniversary party, subtitled podcast. And did we talk a lot about the podcast, or was
I think it was about the party. We talked about the podcast, some things we learned, things we plan to do.
Okay.
So some of it might be a little bit repetitive, but having the benefit of going through the process to, I think, invite everyone and have the conversations, to me, has shed a lot of insight about kind of why we exist and where we want to continue to go.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of good conversations I had that night. I definitely had good conversations. I was telling everyone when I was standing beside Hal that Hal wanted to touch their hair.
Oh, yeah.
Which was not a complete lie. I've always wondered if I should address this while recording, and sometimes I don't want to put this in people's heads, but like, we need to better soundproof this room.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, is just our equipment, sound, the production quality is something that we want to really get better.
I am going to, I seem like I'm all over the place, but it is still a similar thought. I'm like, yeah, I want to soundproof. I was going to ask you, let me ask you then. Imagine we weren't recording this. What's the first thing that I should do to better soundproof this room?
Oh, I think it's
should we do
the panels on the wall.
The ones that we talked about?
The material that absorbs sounds.
I'm going to do that first. I'm going to do some curtains. That will work. And slowly start to do some other stuff. I'm going to put a green screen in here. Kevin Stapley from Control V, and I don't know the other business name, but it's like a conflict management business, was talking to me about this program that he's wanting to put together. And doing a script for the program is one thing, but then recording all of it and then being somewhat perfect as an actor during this recorded program is going to be a challenge, right? So he's looked into AI for it.
Yeah.
And you download this app or this program, it has to be in front of a green screen, and then for like 2 to 5 minutes you follow its prompts, and then it creates like an AI avatar of you.
Oh, okay.
And then you give it like your script or program, and it will just do videos for you. And then my mind exploded.
Yeah.
You don't look excited. I get excited about that. Because for me, that's an amazing way for me to plan my marketing and other stuff, right? where I'm like, okay, I'm not great on camera. Do I need to get better with video? I talked about this morning at Monday Morning Coffee. Yes, I want to do that, but does it really matter? If I had the opportunity to do more video, what it's like to work with me, I would just use this AI thing.
Yeah, so my big pushback to that, and what I've heard, is it's kind of a parlor trick.
Yeah.
You could tell. Like on TikTok, I saw these great AIs of George Lucas analyzing like the new Ahsoka that was totally kind of fake, and him criticizing things, and at first it was funny, but then it irritated me.
Yeah.
And I also think, for your brand, it's like, what's it like to work with me? Here's some AI videos. I think you would be able to tell. Like, I don't know that it's as good as a person.
Yeah.
And I say that because, some feedback I've had a few times of things I've done recorded. People are like, oh, I really liked actually watching that because it was just you recording. People, like, I hate stuff that's overproduced. Or, it's like, I used to work at the bank and they would hire an actor to do these scenarios. And it's like, you could tell they were an actor playing an employee, and it just was never as good as just someone's perspective doing it. So I think can be a useful tool, but I don't know how excited I would be to do it too much.
Can you imagine though if we were recording the podcast in space?
Yeah,
with a green screen? That would be pretty incredible.
Kind of, but
it would no longer the Kawarthas Small Business Podcast. It's the universe.
The Kawartha in Space podcast. This actually links quite well to one of the learnings from the podcast party was
people
just
telling you that I'm an idiot.
No, it was just affirming our core concept of this is a conversation that you can listen to in your car, and it's just like we're in the back seat talking about it, right? We're not out trying to overproduce. We're not telling people exactly what to do. And that format is just what people like. So it's sometimes in business or what we're doing, it's like do more of what you're good at and what you like, which is conversations. It's inviting guests, or up the top said, invite our friends on, people we've got to know. That's the magic of what we're creating, versus if we were AI in space, throw in some buzzwords. It might seem cool, but does anyone actually want to watch it?
I'm going so far off track. I would love to start another podcast like this, and it's called Matt and Brian in Space.
In space.
And we'll just see what the AI does. Talk about business while with the backdrop of space.
This reminds me of the Mark Forward podcast. There's a comedian I like. They had a season where him and his sidekick were in space. And I think that podcast doesn't exist because they were just doing it for fun and probably put way too much into it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was hilarious, but I think the listenership was maybe not massive. Yeah. But
so you think people want to listen to backseat conversations?
I think so. I think
more than something produced.
Part of our audience is the business owners. It's not people who want to know about business or people who think they're small business owners. It's the real life, everyday business owners who want to feel kind of seen, heard, appreciated, and like the way we talk, the way we do things, our perspective on things, versus, teacher Brian delivering content that I stole from, Harvard Business School of here's how to be a business. Mm-hmm. There's people who do that. It's hard for them to get a lot of traction on things that people are hunting for and wanting to watch all the time and then actually use.
Which is nice, because I think my biggest hesitation, and probably other people's, when they start a podcast or when I started this, was this can be a lot more work. And it's work to do a lot of the stuff. But preparing for a podcast or preparing for content would be so much more work. And there's a different, I think there's a time and a place for it. And there are podcasts that I listen to that are really well produced in that way. And they have somewhat of a scripted story and a framework. Like I listen to 2 different golf podcasts, and one of which is completely off the rails. I'm sure they plan it. Of course, I don't want to degrade them. Like it's fantastic. It's probably the most listened to golf podcast out there. But it's just a bunch of dudes talking about golf, right? And I think there's like themes that they want to talk about, but that's it.
And there's a producer in their ear
Absolutely.
who's like producing it. They have a team editing it. They probably,
yes,
all the weird things they talk about, someone's come up with those bits, or like, we should talk about this. And people, they have pre-production meetings and like.
Yeah. That one's called Foreplay. The other one I listen to, not as much because I don't like it as much because it is more structured. I think it's called No Laying Up. And they always have, I don't know if always do, but they often will have like a scripted type of story that they walk you through. And it's interesting. And in some ways, it's almost like more historical. There's another one that I listen to sometimes. I forget what that one's completely called. And that one every time is like a historical story of this is what happened in golf. And like I like that and it's interesting. But at the same time, it's not something I'm like, I gotta listen to it. I gotta hear what the Foreplay guys are talking about because it's fun and it's just ridiculous and a bunch of guys hanging out talking about golf. Like that one to me is always like, I gotta listen to what's going on. And the other more scripted ones, you're like, well, I'll get to that. Like maybe I'll go. Which is, I asked you like if other people care about this. I think I do. I way prefer listening to podcasts that are unstructured and letting me go off the rails like I just did. I just literally zoned out. Go golf for 5 minutes.
Let's talk about golf. And we probably wanted a bit more structured than that, but it's a completely different thing to do a really structured podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And we could easily put 20 hours a week into a half an hour podcast where we like write it. And I just don't like that. I remember listening to, it's a very famous book and there's a podcast about it. I won't mention it because they might be trolling the interweb to sue us. But the people doing it were like, oh, ha, that was a great joke. Like you could tell they're like reading it off a script. Yeah. And I was like, I never want to be that. Mm-hmm. Like I'll make a few notes. I might, there might be some things we script, but
sure.
It's about thinking about the small business owner who is our audience and something that they want to listen to. So we want to provide value. We want to give perspective. We have some big ideas that we talk about in a certain way. We do have some tips or things you can do sometimes, but most people are busy and most people also feel alone.
Mm-hmm.
Or they'll say things like, well, I started this and I was flying by the seat of my pants and I'm still doing that and feel insecure about it. So hammering people with, you should do this because of this, all this research, isn't that helpful? Whereas if you can throw something on that you can listen to in your truck on the way to work and pick something up that day, to me, that's more effective than that sort of hunt for learning content.
Yeah, like I don't like giving people advice. I don't like giving people tips. I'll give people my opinion all day if they ask or if they don't ask. And like Monday morning coffee this morning too, I felt uncomfortable giving people advice and they were asking for it. And other people seemed more comfortable giving the advice, but I was just like not interested in even giving my sort of opinion because if what's right for me, was it right? I don't know. It might not show up today. If it's right or wrong, it might show up 5 years from now. So I'm always uncomfortable. Like, hey, this is my advice. This is the way you have to do it. I like to share, like, this is what I did, and it's worked for me so far, but I don't know if that's going to work for you.
Yeah, it probably won't. Like, the reality is there's no rules.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's guidelines and there's, certain tax rules we kind of have to follow. But even then, like, no one's looking over your shoulder. for every single thing you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And even how closely you follow those all depends on other decisions. Like, working in the bank, working in accounting firms, there's businesses who don't do things like file taxes for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's illegal, or it's not a good thing to do. But like, we don't have tax jail in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And it could bite you in that you can't borrow any money, or, can't sell your business. There's all sorts of things that could hurt, but no one's looking over your shoulder every day saying, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it depends on what you want to do,
Mm-hmm.
and following that, and, finding advice. So the more we can just have conversations, people will pick up what they need. Or the part of the goal of this is they'll reach out and want to ask us or get to know us. And when we get to know their business more, then it's a bit easier to direct and curate advice or opinion.
Yeah, for sure. One learning I had, I don't know if you're going to like this, I'm going to throw this curveball at you, is that I want to better support the listeners. And of course, now you're like, yeah, of course. I want to better support the people that were in the room the other night. So we got that list that we just finished of, these are the guests that we want to invite on. And I was like, we have to invite the people that made an effort to come out to the podcast party, that are listening to us.
Yeah.
And not to like rant. I used to rant a lot more on this podcast. Maybe that was
Me
before
too.
Hypnotherapy.
Yeah.
But like, I'm not sick of it, because I want people to reach out. But I'm kind of tired of the person that reaches out on our website. It's like, hey, I want to be on your podcast. And I want to start asking them now, what's your favorite episode and why?
Yeah.
That should be our first question, because we talked about it a lot this last 30 days. We need to qualify these people, because we're getting a lot of requests. And you can tell a lot of them are like, oh, I know this guy. He's going to let me on his podcast. Or, okay, I heard about this. Let me on your podcast. I want to better support the people that are supporting us.
And it's about building that, this, I've always wanted it to be for the people who listen to it. It's not about us getting famous, or, there's ways you can go promote and buy extra listeners or get on more feeds, or there's lots of parlor tricks you can do to pretend you're famous podcasters. But for me, the most rewarding thing is when people do show up, organically listened and found it, or they feel less bad about something because they heard a discussion on our podcast. So to be able to identify those people and have them on the podcast is, I think, a really good learning for us of supporting who's in the room, right? It was, for me, on that note, getting people to come out on a Friday night is not an easy thing to do. So the fact we had a full, vibrant room meant a huge amount to me, just to see that and just recognize these people came out on a Friday night, and a lot of them joked about it. I don't go out on Friday night for anyone, and they came here, and that, I think, is important.
I'm not joking. I was dead tired. I fell asleep an hour before that party started on my couch. I was exhausted. I drank a coffee that night later than I ever drank a coffee in my entire life.
Yeah.
So tired. It was so hard. And I think that was my biggest takeaway the next morning, waking up and realizing how important and special that was, that those people showed up. It wasn't 2 people, wasn't 1,000. It was a full room of vibrant, excited, supportive people. It was real people. It was 3 non-business owners, 1 person in government, maybe 2 people in government. It was all real business owners, though. It was awesome. People that we've actually positively affected or impacted, or maybe not. They just thought it would be cool to come to this because they like it. And I thought that was really special. And I thought that whole room of people were those were my friends. And you talk oh, okay, you don't want to mix business and personal life and everything, which
I think you do in a small, like we're here for small business. And to me, small business are part of communities. So it's a natural mix, right? You're doing something that's part of your lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like the business and pleasure is like, I think a big corporate mindset, and it fits, maybe that world. But in a
Yeah.
small town, I think we do stuff with our friends.
Absolutely. And the way I think about it though is like all of those people I met first from a business perspective and then have become friends.
Yeah.
Which that makes sense to me. If my buddy Steve, who I golf with all the time, started a business and then he's like, all right, Matt, I want to pay you what you deserve for marketing every month, that I would feel really uncomfortable with. I don't like that relationship. I've done that before. I don't like it. But it's different if it's been my first interaction with you was business related, and then we become friends, then we go on trips, then we hang out personally. That's no problem. I'll do that all day. It's just I don't want I've been friends with you first. That was our first interaction. That's how we got to know each other, and now we're exchanging money. That never works for me.
Yeah.
So everyone in that room, I'm pretty sure, like was first introduced like as colleagues, as other business owners, as that sort of relationship.
Yeah.
But then to look at it now, like those are all people I would want at any party, whether it's a business party, birthday party, whatever. Like those are friends, and I think that was really cool to think about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really cool to think about that. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk about was just the process of having the party and like having a reason to invite people to something. I kind of underestimated that. I know that you did more inviting than I did, but even the invitations I did, the conversations I had was just so refreshing because I invited a lot of people who, had something else on, couldn't quite make it, but it always resulted in a nice message or exchange that wasn't me pitching them or them pitching me. And that was just rewarding on its own.
Yeah, I had a handful of people when they replied, congratulate us on our success. And the podcast is still just a weird thing. It maybe will always be a weird thing to me. But for them to congratulate us on something that's like successful and something we should be proud of, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah. And that was interesting. And like a lot of those people, they didn't know that we had a podcast, which is fine.
That's another reason to have.
Absolutely.
I think from a marketing thing, like a reason to do an event or a party is sometimes just an excuse to be like, hey, we exist and we do this. I know lots of people don't even know, like lots of business owners don't even know we exist.
Yeah.
And that's a way to like put it now in their minds.
Oh, you mean we have to remind people that we exist? Yeah. This is one of the two problems marketing will solve.
So, it really is.
This is the thing. Oh, yeah. Anyways, I had Eric from British and Bar Fuels replied today. He's like, I am so sorry I couldn't make the party on Friday night. Didn't know that you had a podcast, but now I know. And I think he said now it's cool to know that you have a podcast. Yeah. So I thought that was just awesome. You know what? Like we've told one more person now that didn't know, and like that could lead to something else, which is great. So
yeah, and I think we're just in the infancy of podcasts. As much as there's so many around and people think they're this thing, like people are just getting used to listening to them. Or even at the party, I had several conversations of like, how do people listen to your podcast? And some people only they'll watch podcasts on YouTube. We're not on YouTube. We're through like the Apple and the other audio feeds. And, I listen to podcasts in the car, and other people didn't even know that was a thing yet. So it's like, as people learn about it or figure out how to do it, and I know people get surprised all the time that we're on like Apple. It's like, what? I just go to Apple and I can like find you? Like, that's cool.
Yeah.
As you develop those habits, like it just continues to grow.
That is interesting. Yeah, because we're talking to Heather about the YouTube thing, right? And I know that we've talked a bunch in the past about recording this and putting it on YouTube. And now, like, I don't even know if it's necessary. I think it's definitely something that we could do because I think it's a thing that we can monetize, maybe. But also, I don't know how much of a slam dunk that is to go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
I don't watch. That's how I first started watching podcasts or consuming podcasts was on YouTube, and mostly clips of them. Like, here's like a 8 minute segment, but like we're never gonna do that.
It's the kind of clickbait lead generator, the game of getting people to it. And there's a benefit to doing that, but it brings me back to like the core idea of this podcast is having conversations with people.
Yeah.
Right. And it's about the conversation. So it's like be really good at an audio only podcast. And then maybe, there could come a time where we decide to do video or we decide to do more. But to me, that's just has to be natural growth versus forcing it too much.
Yeah. Like, I don't even know if I just said this out loud or not. I feel very spacey today. But like, I don't watch podcasts now on YouTube.
Yeah,
I have a hard time listening to them during the day while I'm working. I have to listen to like lo-fi type of beats now.
Yeah.
I can't listen to podcasts. I get too distracted. So I'll listen to foreplay podcasts sometimes, and I'm just like way too focused on it.
Yeah.
And there's not even a screen. It's just the audio. Like I said, I like the idea of doing YouTube. We could monetize it. However, the little bit I know about it, it's going to be hard. And yes, a podcast recording will be fine, but what we would really need to do is to take that podcast and then create like 10 to 20 little clips.
Yeah.
That would maybe monetize, but then like that would also be very, very hard still.
It's really hard, and it's a commitment to do all that work for... you have to know what you want it to be for. And I think that's where I go in these thought loops where at the end of the day, we do this both for fun and our own enjoyment, but also the marketing is to allow people to know what it's like to talk to us and work with us. So like, would that be a net benefit and be better? I don't know that it will. More so than just trying to get people to listen to us as we are.
You know what we should do is start recording some of the conversations we have about the podcast. And we've kind of done that a little bit the last couple of weeks, but we talk about this offline a lot. We should kind of already have.
Yeah.
But next time we have these conversations scheduled, we should record them because this would be kind of interesting. I think, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
I think people are like... I think of like our listeners who are listening probably are interested in this. If you hate this, like, let us know.
Well, we had people in the room on Friday night that, not because of us, I'm not saying that at all, but they've known us for a year or two, and they've been on the podcast, and then they've recently started a podcast. Maybe we were a small, I'm losing, like, what would the word, catalyst for it be? So even in that group of people, Hal's got a podcast too. Not because of us either, but and his is not even business related. He's like a passion for music. So him and his cousin will sit down and they'll talk about a song. Like, so just talk about a song for however long. But
I think it shows the it's the catalyst or the opening up to like the benefits of podcasting, which I think we're just scratching the surface on. For most businesses or most people, and like what you could just create a podcast about.
It's interesting because I'm trying to think of like businesses that we know locally that have a podcast. None.
No.
But then if you think bigger than that, like how many have them? Is it mostly marketers? Is it service-based?
I think it's a lot of marketers. It's the business landscape for podcasts is like very unique. I think some have niche podcasts. My read on it, and something I believe to be true, is most businesses should have at least a limited series podcast. Because if you can have 10 episodes of the most important things you talk about over and over, then that helps your audience or your customers just know more about what you do or maybe understand things. I think sometimes when people do it, they do it in such a flashy marketing way that nobody notices it,
Sure.
or they don't understand it.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's a good way to just establish trust
Yeah.
and talk about the things you think people should know about you.
Because I think that there's some businesses that a podcast would be good for. Hear me out.
Oh yeah,
The first one that I think would be Kim wasn't there the other day from Com Solutions. She would have a great podcast to talk about the people that she's worked with, have them on her show. Hey, what was it like before you worked with me? What was it like after working with me? A great like testimonial type of podcast. Les and Hillary from State of Mind Hypnosis, they have a podcast. I went home that night and I listened to it for the first time. It was great. There's something, of course, nice about hearing their voices. They have great podcast voice.
Yeah.
And it's awesome to hear them because like they're friends and we work with them. And it was just good and it was interesting. And it was something like, yeah, I want to support them. Their podcast, I've only listened to one episode so far and I want to start from the beginning. Their podcast would be great if they had a guest on every episode or every once in a while. Like, what was it like before you worked with me? What was it like after you worked with me? That would work great. I busted Eastman's chops on Friday while he was there. Like, we're all laughing about it. I'm like, nobody wants to hear about a plumbing job that you did, though. And he, like, kind of laughed and agreed. What do you think, though?
I think, actually, is a prime candidate for a limited series of, it's not about the plumbing job, but it could be about like things you might need to know in your own house or how it works to work with a plumber like them, or the things that maybe they talk through or they do for you that you don't know about. Good example is like, if I'm getting a cottage, what do I need to know about my plumbing so that I don't get, the wool pulled over my eyes by another plumber? So, am I going to listen to it every week as entertainment? No. If I had a series of tight, short episodes where it now makes me fully understand like all the things happening in my house, and I just know enough so that I trust that these professionals know what they're doing, I think that helps, because I know, especially in plumbing, people will just never do any maintenance because they don't understand it. And then they only call when something catastrophic broke. But from a business standpoint, it's better for them to have relationships with clients. So are a million people going to listen? No. But can you create better relationships with 100 people? That, I think there's benefits to it for a little bit of time to record it and put it out.
I've already changed my mind. A lot of what you said, but I'll put a different spin on it. I think we might actually both be wrong because we're not DIYers.
Yeah.
Me and you are never going to just sit down and watch a bunch of do-it-yourself videos on YouTube. There's a whole market for that. But imagine that was like that, but for podcasting, like for a plumbing podcast. Here's do-it-yourself, how to replace the bowl of your toilet or replace a faucet or whatever. Instead of the visuals, they're walking the person through it with vocally. Yeah, I think that's maybe a totally different.
That's, I think, a different type that's possible. I guess I still think I think if you're a local guide for something, then just answer the question, what's this person like to deal with, could be just reason to have a short podcast. Again, it just helps answer a bunch of questions, establish some trust.
Right. If someone's looking for sponsored content podcast, where do you think they should go, Brian?
Well, I think they should go to the Kawarthas Small Business Podcast. And, we weren't planning this change in direction, but I do think one of our next things is trying to do some sponsored content, that can be used either on this feed or, we can create another feed for that type of stuff. Because in general, people want to know what's happening with businesses. They want to know what businesses do. You're in Google. People are searching for stuff all the time. we just like to know who's around, what they're like, and it's easy to listen to podcasts. Sometimes you don't want to phone someone up or jump through the hoops. Like, I just think there's a reason why that works. I've been listening recently, the rise of, you go on TikTok, there's a lot of micro influencers who do sponsored content. And it's like, I follow Jules the lawyer in Toronto, who's kind of funny, does like little brand deals for things. And, instead of those companies spending millions of dollars on TV advertisement on the Blue Jays game, they're reaching out to these who influences their target market specifically, and it works. And podcasting's a way to do that and reach, like, it's a smaller, more engaged audience, and it's just another marketing channel.
It's another channel. People still or used to like billboards. They like radio. They like social media. They like video. They like blogs. Podcasting is another opportunity. It's audio. And the question I get all the time from a marketing perspective is like, how do I deal with all these FAQs that I have, these frequently asked questions? And I have an answer for that, and I have a process to like actually tackle that from a content perspective. But to me, the podcasting can be a lot of that, or this is what it's like to work with me. And the next question is always, okay, if we're going to do a podcast, like, how do I do it? I don't have equipment. I don't know how. We have the expertise to be able to get that audio properly recorded and out there for you.
And just to have it as a tool is so powerful. Even if it's one episode, I think of how many meetings have you and I been in with a business owner where you know nothing about them. Zoom comes on or they show up, and within 20 minutes, you now know so much about them. You've learned something new about the industry, and you understand like things. Recording even that, and that now it's like, oh, I get it, right? It's like, oh, I have this problem, and I might think it's really easy to solve or really hard to solve, and now I just know so much about it. And so many services, that's part of their sales process and pitch. All you're doing is recording that and making it easy to send it or have it as a tool for everyone that you talk to.
Marketing with Matt podcast. I record all the discovery calls. I have 15 minutes. I ask those questions. That's kind of interesting. I just had a conversation with someone on Friday where I learned something I never would have thought of, but also learned something super interesting that I'm going to share now for the third or fourth time in the last 4 days. They are a designer, install timber type of company. So like big peaks of roofs or A-frames. They build like beautiful timber wood accessories and beautiful pergolas and outdoor stuff. And I asked them, like, are you guys like, will you do log homes? Because that's essentially what it is. And like, they said no, they don't want to do it. Because I was just thinking dollar signs. I'm like, that's got to be a huge project. The guy's like, it's not worth it. I'm like, what do you mean? He was like, imagine if you build a log house, you do the exterior log wall, and now you have to insulate it on the inside. So then you insulate it, and then now you have to put drywall over the inside, or you have to put up another timber wall, and it's a complete waste of time. You're building two different houses. And I was like, I've never thought about that, but it's also fascinating to think about.
Just all these things that we don't really know, and none of these are things that you can't learn elsewhere. But like, why not be the guide or the person that just talks about it in an easy to understand way and have it as a tool?
Yeah. I'm on that website a couple of weeks ago talking to the women's shelter. Not in town, not that it matters, but I'm talking to a women's shelter. And I was talking about redesigning the site. And they got this big button in the top right-hand corner where it's like exit. And I'm like, why on earth would you guys have an exit button as soon as someone gets onto the website? And I'm like, that's just the dumbest design ever. And then as soon as they opened their mouths and were about to say it, it hit me. I was like, you need to have that exit button, because if there's someone that's
Oh,
scared or nervous or being traumatized or abused and they go to a women's shelter website,
yeah.
they need to be able to quickly exit out. So they got that big giant exit sign. And it often will go to, I shouldn't maybe say this, but like it often will go to the Weather Channel website, or it goes to Google. And as soon as they started saying it, I was like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. But it made like perfect sense.
Yeah.
And all these little things sometimes you learn along the way as a marketer or as a business person. It's like fascinating to me.
Just fascinating stuff. And you can be the person that guides people to that. It doesn't always have to be the big YouTuber that's doing it all. This has been a long episode. It's gone in a really neat direction. So if you're still listening to this, thank you very much. It's been great. A couple of years of the podcast, and we look forward to our next steps. If you'd like to be on the podcast, please send us an email to set it up at kawarthasmallbusinesspodcast.ca.